Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome to the meeting room. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we're going to be talking about leadership today. I'm the host, Billy Duran, and I am happy to be in the meeting room with our producer and co-host, Hali Gibson. Hali, welcome.
Great to be here.
I can't wait to hear your nugget of the week.
My nugget is coming from Dr. Kevin Elko, who we are very close with. He talks about if you write down your goal, you have to sit it in front of you or else you're going to forget it. Earlier this year, you and I sat down on our marketing team's 2024 goals, and it's kind of a 6-page manifesto, if you will. And I realized if I just have it in my file folder and I'm not looking at it every day, I'm going to miss a lot of the pieces that I put a lot of work in to plan. So now it is posted in my office.
Could be the issue with having a 6-page goal sheet. That could be the challenge. I had an interesting exchange with one of our emerging leaders yesterday. Just caught him on the fly, and you have to be ready whenever you're around me. You're going to get caught on the fly. I said, all right, I need your 5 goals for the year. And he went boom, 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 boom. He just laid them out. So very proud of him. Hali, today I'm so excited to have Chris Hicks on our podcast. Chris is the CEO of Gemini Coatings, headquartered in El Reno, Oklahoma, just outside of Oklahoma City. However, Chris makes his own office in Dallas, Texas. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Chris, Hali, is one of the reasons we actually have this podcast. When I heard Chris's story, I just remember saying his story needs to be out there, and all of the CEOs that we've brought in, having them tell their story. Chris was at the root of this because he has such an interesting story. And Chris, I know your career started at Sherwin-Williams, but instead of me doing the stat sheet, I'd really like for you to tell your story from where you began and now being the CEO of Gemini Coatings.
Sounds good. Well, Sherwin-Williams really started in college. I was looking to make some spending money, and I was playing baseball at Dallas Baptist University, and came from a family that didn't have a lot. So if I wanted some spending money, I needed to go to work, and so I started working at the Sherwin-Williams store there, pretty close to the college. It was within a couple of miles of the college. And that's how I kind of got started in the paint business and still in it today. So as I went through my career at Sherwin-Williams, which was pretty short, as I was in college, I worked there. They said, whenever you can come work, here's our hours, make it work with your schedule. And that worked for me. And then when I left school, I went to work with them more permanently for a brief period of time. But that's really where I started my career, was at Sherwin-Williams. And that's where my first mentor kind of came into the picture. And that's the gentleman that ran the store there at Sherwin-Williams was a really strong family man and really helped me in a time when I was leaving school, kind of made the decision I wasn't going to be a professional baseball player and going to have to work for a living. And that's where it all began for me. And really, I've always thought, Billy, if you do right by people and you try to do the right thing, good things happen to you. And I happened to be working in the Sherwin-Williams store one Sunday by myself, when a gentleman came into the store, and I kept noticing he kept kind of putting everybody else in front of him. He kept letting customers go ahead of him. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, what's this guy doing? He's kind of casing the joint or something, and I wasn't sure what he was doing. But after a number of customers left, he finally made his way up to the front counter and said, I need to buy some paint. I've got to do a demonstration. And I just need a gallon of paint that I can use that's oil based and my inquisitive nature, I just said, well, what are you doing? What are you demoing? How are you doing it? And he said, well, I'm demoing this electrostatic machine. And I said, wow, what's that? What's it do? And he said, well, you can spray metal ornamental ironwork and you can paint the whole thing at once because it wraps around. It's electrostatically charged. So it really was interesting to me. And I think in my questioning of him, his name was Mel Faust, and he kind of became my second mentor. But Mel said, I guess my inquisitive nature, Mel said, you ever thought about being a sales guy? And I said, well, I think I could do it, but not really. I think I do sales every day, but keep in mind, I'm 21 years old, at the time. So he said, well, I might have an opportunity for you. I just picked up this new company I'm working for, and we sell pumps and airless pumps and sprayers, and why don't you come work for me? And I said, that sounds pretty good. How do we make that happen? And long story short, I'll cut to the chase on some of this. Mel actually drugged me out of the paint store business into a sales role. And he told me, I remember one of the magic moments was he said, look, I'll pay you what you're making today and pay you commission on top of it. And I said, man, what a deal. I can't go wrong with that, right? Well, he failed to tell me that I was going to be an independent contractor and had to pay my own taxes, So when he started down that path and took home my first paycheck, I said, hey, you didn't take any taxes out of this. He goes, that's your problem. So, long story short, is I got an early lesson on how to save for taxes and all that stuff. But that's where my career really started in sales. I would say relationship building and sales. And Mel was one of those guys that really, I would describe him today as kind of a used car sales guy. He was the old school salesman, but he had a really good ability to build personal relationships. And I learned from Mel that was a key to being successful. And I actually started working for Mel in May of '89, and by the mid-year, he'd already made me a partner. And by a year later, I bought him out of the business. So a lot of good things happened in that area to be able to make that happen. But that's where I started my independent sales business, and I'm proud to say I grew it from 23 years. I grew it to $55 million in sales. And along that way, I guess what really molded me as a young man and all along that way was, as an independent agent, I worked for 25 or so companies, and I was exposed to leadership at all those companies. And we would go every year to sales meetings, and I would go meet companies that were billion-dollar companies that were smaller family-owned companies, and I got to really witness a vast array of leadership skills, talents, people that were had been doing it a long time, and along that way, it helped mold me, because I saw the things I really liked in certain leaders and things I didn't really like in certain leaders. But I guess the moral of the story is I was open, and I witnessed a lot of different types of leadership over my 23 years in that business. And one of the companies I worked for was Gemini. They were one of my independent manufacturers. I sold their product and had a great relationship with their management team. And really, the reason I'm at Gemini today is David Warren. He was the then president, CEO of Gemini, and he hassled me for years to come to work for him. He felt that we could do great things together, and he kept after me. I said, well, David, I do work for you. He goes, no, I want you to really come to work for me. Come work for me as an employee. And at the time, I said, I've got a business. I don't really want a job. I've got a business. I think I'm doing pretty well. But he stayed persistent, and he caught me one December at a Christmas party and laid a challenge on the table that I didn't realize what I was missing. In 23 years of doing the independent sales rep, I had it down pretty smooth. I knew what I was doing. I had a great team. We had built a great business. But old David threw a challenge on the table, and he said, I think I got something you can't do. And I said, well, okay, that now you've hit a nerve, So for me, I went back to my wife at then age 45 and said, I'm going to sell my business and go to work for David. And she thought I'd lost my mind. We had spent together 23 years building this thing. And she's like, you're going to do what? You're going to sell the business and go to work for David? But I did, because what David tapped in me that I didn't really know I was missing at the time was something to spark me again. I had really gotten into a very groove of what my day looked like and what I was doing. And I was 45, and I thought, is this what it is for the rest of my career? And what David sparked in me was challenging me in a way that I thought, man, I don't know, but he challenged me, and I think I want to go give it a shot. And ultimately went to work for David, sold my business to my employees, went to work for David and as his VP of sales. So and his challenge to me was, hey, come run our industrial business. And I went, industrial? Oh, I've never done that before, So it was a little uncomfortable. It was sales, but it was uncomfortable in the sense that I had spent my entire career in, let's call it retail sales, not contractor sales or industrial. And then, unfortunately for us as a company, David got sick, and 5 years later, in April of 2018, and passed away in October of 2018. And the board asked me to kind of step in and take over. So, you know, David was a huge part of I came to work to Gemini really to finish my career working for David. He was that type of man. He inspired me to sell my business and work for him. And I can say today that I've done everything in my power for the last 5 years to try to fulfill his vision that he laid out there for us as an organization. And I continue to try to live up to his example that he set. And really, that's what drives me today is to think about David and what he thought this company could be, and then trying to make it happen.
So, Chris, it's so interesting because this is probably the fourth or fifth time I've heard this story. And every time I'm inspired by it because I go back to the single thread that you always go back to. You were at the counter, you were paying attention. Something brought your attention to the guy that was waiting in line. And there's some awareness that you had about, I need to find out about this. But there was something in you in that exchange that he saw that said, I see something in this person. So, you know, we're going to talk to our emerging leaders directly in a minute. We're going to get you to speak to them directly, but to our team and to your team that are listening, you just never know what those encounters, those individuals that you meet, you never know the value that people bring and what they see in you and how that's encouraged you in your career from a front counter sales experience all the way to the CEO of the company. I'm particularly appreciative of you pointing out how you evaluated leaders that you met, taking from the one that you really liked and then also saying, this is something I don't like. We actually had, you know, one of our colleagues, Mike Rizzo, we were talking about this early with Mike, one of our very first podcast, and Mike said some of his leadership skills was developed around what he didn't want to do as much as it was about what he did want to do. So I appreciate you pointing those boundaries out. So Chris, you talked a little bit about Gemini, and now you're the CEO. Tell us exactly what Gemini does. What are your products, and you know, where are your locations? Tell us a little bit about Gemini Coatings.
So Gemini is 60 years old this year, so we're celebrating our 60th anniversary as a company. We were an ESOP in late 80s and 100% employee owned since 2003. So over 20 years of 100% employee ownership. We have manufacturing facilities in Dallas, Texas, and Oklahoma City, as well as service distribution centers in Long Island, New York, Harrisonburg, Virginia, Bullhead City, Arizona, Reno, Nevada, and Toronto, Canada. So we've got 180 employees scattered across the U.S. and Canadian markets. And what we really do is manufacture paint. I mean, that's a real simple way to say it, but we're focused on wood coatings for the inside of your home and for the exterior of your house, like a deck or a fence. So you just picture your kitchen cabinets or your furniture that you're sitting down to have dinner with the family. Those products are all coated with something, and that's what we manufacture. So our specialty is wood coatings, and we take pride in making wood beautiful. That's one of the things we say. We're here to make wood beautiful.
Well, Chris, I know we're going to talk specifically about your culture in a little bit, and I know I'm going to bring Hali here in a minute to ask you some questions about culture. But one of the things I really admire about you is you genuinely care about your people, and it just comes across. I mean, there is a genuine care for your people. Where does that come from? Did you have someone in your life that you saw that? Is that part of your upbringing? And then beyond that, how do you teach that? In other words, how do you hand that off to the next generation of Gemini leaders?
Well, I mean, the way that it started for me was the way I was brought up. I mean, my dad I saw him as a cabinet builder, construction man growing up. We built houses together. We did things together as a family. And I always really respected the way my father treated the people that worked with him and for him. In some cases, I often felt he treated them better than he did some of us because he was parenting me. But when it came to some of the folks that worked on the crews, he had a compassion that I noticed and I appreciated, sometimes envied the compassion he showed for other people, and people that know my dad wouldn't call compassion, would not be one of the things, people that had known him in later years wouldn't name that as one of his key characteristics. But I can tell you that I saw it when it came to our pets or our people that worked with us or things like that. He just had that in there. He didn't like to show it a lot out in public, but he had it. And then, for me, it was mainly upbringing, but also my time as an independent rep. There were a couple of key stakeholders at some large companies, and one in particular was Tony Torntori at Wagner, the company we sold their pumps, sprayers. Tony had a real passion for people, and he just showed that and had no qualms about showing that he cared for people and wanted to know more about you, who you were, what your family was, all your characteristics. So I think for me, it's one of the things I admired because I had seen the other in many other examples where the leader walked into the room, and it's hard to call them a leader because they walked in the room as the boss, and they treated you like they were the boss, and you didn't feel like you were part of a team. So it helped me to see, one, starting out with my father, and two, as I went through and saw different leadership, characteristics. I believed true, genuine care for your people, compassion is something that's hard to teach, to be honest, Billy. The second part of your question is, how do you teach it? Well, I think you lead by example. I think if you do it, then you hope, as I did when I saw it in action, I took it up and said, that's something I want to be. So I think it's hard to have someone sit down and go, hey, I want you to be compassionate. But the truth is, if they see you being compassionate, you hope that translates into something they believe is part of your success story. Because I say it definitely is part of my success story.
And we say it all the time, leading by example, and it sounds so cliche-ish, but the truth is there's so much meat in that, because even during my journey, I caught more than I was taught. I kind of caught it because I was around it more than we sat down and said, okay, here's how you need to do this. I was watching and observing. Chris, when we first met a couple years ago, I mean, we had an immediate connection. When, we were up in Pennsylvania, and we, two Southerners lost up there in Pennsylvania, probably was part of that connection. But I love when you talk about your children and your family, that you just light up. And in particular, not that one outweighs the other, but I know you have a daughter that plays golf and in college, and you like to go and watch her play. And it really spoke to me that you're one of those people that are searching for that work-life balance. That I want to stay involved with the company, and I want to be there when I'm there, but also want to keep that balance with my family and how I love my family well as a CEO of a huge organization. So tell us about how you do that, where you came to that, and then what's that like, balancing that but that process.
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to my childhood. I mean, my dad, I remember very expressive. My dad said many times that his dad, my grandpa on his side, never came to watch him play football. He played football in college, played football in semi-pro, and my dad often said that Paul never came to watch him, never watched him play a sport. And my dad overcompensated. He never missed a single thing. I mean, I mean, literally, if we were doing something, he was there. And what I really loved about that was, I didn't know at the time, but I look back and know what he was doing. He missed that in his own relationship with his dad, and he wanted to make sure we felt supported. And sometimes it got a little out of control, and you and I have laughed about some stories that his support sometimes took on he wasn't one of those sit in the stands quietly and cheer for his child. He was definitely a very involved parent. So I took from that, like I have my whole life, the things I liked about it and the things I didn't like about it. And it's made me know that whatever my kids were into, and I have two daughters, whatever my kids were into, I wanted to support them. But I wanted to support them without the pressure. And boy, that's not easy to do. And I constantly struggled because my dad was all about the pressure. So that part of it, I've worked hard not to do. But I can tell you, I've not mastered the work-life balance. It is a constant battle. We're leaving tomorrow, headed down to Destin, Florida, because Rachel's got a 3-day tournament. This is her last semester, and she's playing in a 3-day tournament in Destin. And Carrie and I are going down to catch it because we've made all but one of her college tournaments. And it's important because, yes, have I seen her play golf 1,000 times? Have I played with her 1,000 times? But I know she likes looking over on the cart path to see mom and dad there supporting her. So that balance for me started at an early age. And my dad is today one of my heroes, and if not one of my best friend. And he didn't make it easy, but he definitely supported us, and he supported everyone else on our team. And I respected that then, and I respect it now.
And it is so important. And I actually, again, this is part of what makes you great at what you do, I believe, is to say, I haven't mastered this. I'm still working on this. I like to tell people I'll be 63 this year. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I'm still working on this thing that is life. So I appreciate you saying that. So Chris, on the podcast, we like to talk about leadership and what it actually looks like, not so much in theory, but what does it look like? So you spent your life mostly in career, and we've talked about a lot of guys that come out of that market side of business, and you've transitioned from being the CEO, from sales into CEO. And sometimes CEOs have trouble staying out of the weeds when they're great at the sales part of the business. How have you made that work and transitioned out of sales into the CEO role?
Well, it's another battle I do every day, face every day. I certainly am a salesperson, and that's what I'm most comfortable doing. It's what I think is part of my core. So it's awful difficult to stay out of the weeds on the sales side. And I think one of the ways I balance it is as coming into the CEO role, it was not destined something I had in my destiny. I never looked up and said, I want to be the CEO. I was very happy leading the sales organization. It gave me what I needed reward wise, from a personal standpoint and from a financial standpoint. So when I moved into that role, let's not kid ourselves. There's a bit of sales in being a CEO, right? I mean, you're selling vendors, you're selling the board, you're selling your people on the company. And boy, it served me well in many areas of this new role, but there was a lot more to it. And where I didn't have expertise in many other areas that you have to have some to be a good, effective CEO, I buckled down and started learning, and I surrounded myself with people that were better than me in many of those areas. And I said, hey, my strengths are this. I can bring this to the table. I need very smart people around me that can help me with the HR part of the business, with the financial part of the business, with all the other elements that I think you need to be an effective CEO. So am I out of the weeds from the sales perspective? No way. I try my hardest to stay out of the weeds. And I often say my VP of sales, God bless Bob Bine, he's got the worst job at Gemini because I've always got an opinion when it comes to sales. So he has to live with that. My operations folks and my financial folks, they can put one over on me here and there, but the sales guys, they got a tough time putting one over on old Hicks because he's done it for a lot of years. So it's definitely something hard to stay out of the weeds on. But I guess where I've learned to do that some is try to pull back and get really comfortable in the other areas of the business and learn more about those, because I had to become a student of, real quick, just as a sales guy, you're focused on top line sales and gross profit. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, that's my entire life. They said, go sell more and sell it for more. And that was it. So as a CEO, all of a sudden there's all this in the middle of that. There's all this SG&A and all these other things in the middle and HR and all that stuff. And they're like, you got to be more than a sales guy, and you got to think about more than just the top line revenue. And so it was a challenge again to me to learn something that I didn't know real well and that I wasn't super comfortable with.
Chris, it's so I have to lean back because I'm laughing because I get into the exact same trouble that you get into with some of our folks, because when I lean forward too far, I generally will mess it up because I'll get into somebody's area that they're a lot better at it than I am. But I appreciate, again, your vulnerability speaking here. I want to, before we leave the subject though, when you talking about surrounding yourself and bringing people to the table, helping you in the areas of HR and finance and all the different nuances of being a CEO, what was that learning process like? I mean, you very comfortable over here, very strong in one area. I know your personality type. How difficult was that to stay in it, to learn it like you really needed to?
Well, that's a challenge. I mean, it's you get to my age, I'm 55, and you think, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And for me, it's tough. But I do find it interesting, and anything that's a challenge, I find interesting. So I think for me, it's kind of the way I'm built. I was always challenged as a middle child, and a brother that was always a little bit faster, and a brother that was always a little more athletic and a little bit smarter. I constantly was raised in an environment where I was constantly trying to prove myself. And I think for me, that's an internal gear I have. When someone said, you need to learn these things, then, that gear is in there. I can turn it on and really buckle down and say, I'm going to learn the finances. I'm going to learn to be, I'm not going to be a CPA or a CFO, but I dang sure learn the finances and learn how they tick and how to, manage those. But it's the key is to have those good people around you that you can be vulnerable with and say, look, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to break this down into sales language for me and help me understand it. Because typically, if I can get that, I've got it. I can hear it once and I've got it. And that's one of my strengths is I can hear it and I retain it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me was just being open to that. Other people coming in and saying, okay, I don't have to know everything about everything. Nobody does. So use your strengths and be willing to hone your weaknesses, or not even your weaknesses, but hone the areas where you need more work, hone those into strengths. And that's kind of the way I approached it.
Fantastic. Chris, so just to pivot a little bit more towards leadership development and culture, we're going to next few things kind of focus on that. You and I have had all sorts of talks about leadership development. As a matter of fact, you and I spoke last year and you were on your way to a leadership boot camp. I thought that was such a great term. Why is leadership development so important to you, and what are you doing specifically to ensure that leadership development's taking place at Gemini?
Well, it's super important to me because I kind of live by one main goal. I want to leave Gemini better than I found it. And when I say that, I mean, when I came here, there was a lot of really, really good things about Gemini. And, my goal in the beginning was not to mess it up, right? I kind of like your statement earlier, because half the time I find myself in discussions and maybe in an HR area or maybe even in an AR area. And I realize I'm in the room and I go, I'm not making this worse. I'm just making it worse. I need to leave. I need to leave and get out of the way because I'm asking questions that everybody else knows the answer to but me. So I need to get out of the room and go. So I know for me, leadership really is critical for us. It's on every, I asked the board to put it on my goals and say, I want a goal every year about succession and leadership. And I think that's why when I get in my management team and we look at our team, our middle management team down below that, we put it on the long-term and short-term strategy list. I mean, it is always a strategy for us to enhance our leadership in our group. And most times that requires you to go outside and find people that are really good at it. And when we went to a boot camp, don't kid yourself. I was out of my element, and so were a lot of my people. But that boot camp pushed us outside of our comfort zones as a group. And we came out of that a better leadership group, even as managers. And it really showed me that we need to be doing that on a level down into our organizations. And that's where my goals, it's one of the things I'm passionate about. So it's one of the things that I wake up every day thinking about. I want to help our people who want to be leaders and people that maybe don't know they want to be a leader, but I see something in them that lets me believe they could be leaders and invest in that. So we're really committed to investing in that with our people.
Well, I'll say this, from a top-line executive level, you being with them at the boot camp instead of sending them to the boot camp says a whole lot about who you are and what you're about in leadership development. And I think that's messaging to all of our business owners and our proven leaders, our executive leaders that are tuned into the podcast. Don't just send them, go with them. Haley?
We often view leadership and culture as mirrors to each other. You can't have one without the other. So how would you kind of describe Gemini's culture? And how do you, like you said earlier, you're enhancing the leadership in your company. How do you enhance your culture and kind of embrace it and invest in it?
Yeah, good question. Great question. The culture at Gemini was really pretty solid when I got here. I mean, you don't build a company that's 100% employee owned, as you know. There's a lot of people around you. There's a lot of champions around you that are building the culture. And those champions are those that have been there and have drank in the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and are walking the walk and talking the talk, right? So one of the luxuries we have in a little small town in Oklahoma, El Reno, we're 20 miles west of Oklahoma City, is a lot of our plant employees, about 60% of our people work there. And a lot of those people knew each other from grade school on through. So they grew up in this town together. We pull from that community and they come to work to Gemini because it's one of the better places to work in that town. And there's this, the cliche is used family a lot, right? When you talk about business. But I can tell you one of the things that attracted me and David put it on display when he hired me, was that connection, the family part of Gemini. And so the culture is really not hard to develop and not hard to maintain when you've got people leaving there in their early 50s, millionaires, because they retired early and the company helped build that. So they're the champions that you invite back every financial meeting and go, hey, remember him? Yeah, he used to turn a wrench around here as a maintenance guy, and now he's retired and he left here with a truckload of cash. And you know, that really helps build the culture. But Haley, I think we all struggle a bit with the a little bit of the younger generations trying to attach them to that culture, because the things are different. Even my kids, I've noticed they're driven differently than we were as guys, Billy and my age. We constantly have to talk about how do we keep that culture alive, because retirement is not something most of our mid-20s think about when they come into the company. They're thinking about Friday night. You know, am I going to have gas for the Mustang? Am I going to have those things? So, you know, the story we used to preach about retirement and all the things we do for benefits as an ESOP, really, they don't resonate as much with that young group, right? So we've had to bring younger people into our culture meetings to say, okay, let me understand this being a little bit. You know, I'm raising two of them, or I should say my wife raises two of them, and I've been a participant in that. But I've noticed that they see things differently. They're not built the same way we are. And that's not a negative thing. It's just a fact of life. And my same old message doesn't always resonate. So we work hard at bringing different people into our culture meetings to try to make sure that we're focused on the right things. We'll look at policies to, you know, I just approved a policy today to allow for, you know, sounds crazy. Billy's going to laugh at me, but, you know, we signed a policy today to expand our wellness program to include where they could bring a treadmill behind their desk, you know, and put it in their office, and we'll pay for $300 of it to, you know, to support safety but I'm shocked at how the young group is like, all of a sudden everybody's buying treadmills, you know, and they're walking behind their desks, and it's just for an old guy like me, it's like, wow, I didn't realize that had any that it would be beneficial. But that came out of a meeting with another group of young emerging leaders in our company that said, you want to keep the culture going, you got to think a little bit differently than you have. And we're open to that, I think, is the big story here.
And the really cool part about that, Chris, is knowing that, inviting people in, being willing to listen to that, again, is a credit to you and your team, because if not, what's the alternative? You turn around and they're all gone. They've gone to another opportunity where somebody else may listen. We just finished our new employee orientation session. This week we had people in from several of our branches outside, and we wrote on the board, what is it that will keep you here for 20 years? And we put these words on the board. They want to be recognized. They want to be heard. They want their ideas to be able to come forward. I mean, we put all these things on the board. But what was interesting, that whole list of things, they didn't say, we want more money. It was all about other things. Not that money isn't important. Yeah. And you know that I'm not saying that it's not, but it was interesting, the things that they listed on the board. And I think that it was good for our team to hear that. As a matter of fact, I took a picture of that board. I emailed that list out to all of our leaders and said, here's what people are asking for. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Chris specifically about what he's looking for in leaders. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back in the meeting room with Chris Hicks, and I just love Chris has got such energy, and it just inspires me every time I'm around you, Chris. When you're looking for leaders, because, listen, I think that we've got a lot of emerging leaders listening to this podcast at Threaded Fasteners, at Gemini. When your team finds out that you've been on this podcast, they're going to hear what you have to say. So this is an opportunity for you to speak to them too. But they're emerging leaders listening. We got a big listening audience, and they want to know, Chris, what is it that you're looking for in leaders?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with compassion. I think that's one of the things I've I call a core value for me that I want to find in leaders. Compassion is incredibly important for me. And again, this is what I look for. I don't have the lock on what's best in a leader, but I can tell you, for me, I look for compassion. I look for competency, of course. I mean, can they do the job? But compassion. And then right near the top at Gemini is culture. Are they a culture fit? Can they fit in with my group, with our people? Because that's not always a given. And so culture, compassion, and competency. But I think one of the things that I look for in a leader too is I'm looking for people that are willing to that are willing to take action. Even if taking action and they make a mistake, I'm looking for people that are willing to take action and not get locked up when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Because that in leadership, you got to be willing to make some mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. If you think you're not, then you're hard on yourself. You're too hard on yourself. So I think for me, I want people to do something, even if it turns out to be wrong. But in that time when it is wrong, they're willing to course correct and move on. So for me, it's really centered around those key things. They're willing to take action. People that are willing to take action, they're competent, they're compassionate, and they've got a strong culture fit, I think is the list I would put out there.
So, Chris, when you're interviewing people and you're kind of gathering this data, maybe even in the interview room, are there any keys? Are there any triggers? Are there things that you see in people that would say, this is our kind of folks here, or I'm not sure if this person's going to make it? Where do you pick up on those things?
Wow. That's a great question, but I've always had a knack for it, Billy. I mean, it comes down to being able to read the guy across the table you're trying to sell something to. And as a salesperson, I've honed that talent to be able to see what's important to the people across the table. But what I've found out in my career of interviewing people is if you just listen, talk less and listen more, they'll show you a lot. They'll show you who they are. They'll show you what's in their heart, because a little bit of silence means it can go a long way, because they want to fill the air with something. And you find a lot out in between the questions sometimes when you pause and you wait. So that I think it's been a knack for me. I can tell you when I came here, as the VP of sales, they forgot to tell me that I wasn't running my own business anymore. So I met my sales team for the first, and we left that room 3 people light of what we came into it, because I met them, spent about 3 hours with them, and said, those guys aren't going to make it here. They're just not going to make it here. Not in any way that I see the sales organization working. Now, I was a little full of myself at the time, and I realized that in hindsight, but I also knew what I was looking for, because I'd spent 23 years building a sales team of straight commission sales guys. So I had a vision for what sales guys are motivated by and driven by. And I can tell you that I may have been wrong. I and probably was wrong about some of the individuals in that room, but I knew I've always had a knack for reading the room and reading the people. And like I said, a lot of times if you let them talk, they'll take you down the path of where they'll show who they are. And it's not easy, as you can imagine, being around me, but when I get into that environment, I can shut up. It's not, doesn't appear to be the case, but I can.
Well, I will say this from our leader standpoint, and if I hear what you're saying, and I love it, is that if you're in a leadership role and you're looking for team members, you better know what you're looking for in team members, because a rotten member of the team can spoil it for a bigger group. So, Haley?
I love how you can mention that meeting with your sales team and look back on it and know that you probably weren't 100% in the right. I had a conversation just this morning with one of our team members, and I said, look, 4 years ago, I probably would have had a different reaction to this. And I can look back on it now and say, I need to be checked on this particular topic. So how can you see yourself in the past 5 years, maybe 10 years, evolving as a leader? And if we were to pull someone in Gemini 5-10 years ago versus today, what would they say?
Well, I think today they would tell you, I'm firm but fair, and that I'm determined, but that I am compassionate. I do make it a point to get out of my chair and go out into the facilities and know the names and family members. And it's part of being, in my opinion, it's part of being compassionate. You got to know who the people are. You got to know who's working an extra job, whose dad's sick, and whose child is battling school. And so I think they would tell you that I'm a definitely firm leader, but that I'm fair. And they can all tell you that I'm determined, that I like to win. In fact, I hate to lose more probably than I do like to win. but I can tell you that they would say I'm compassionate. And Haley, early on, I came into Gemini after building a business from zero, basically zero to $55 million. And I thought, man, I was it. I knew everything. Right. And then I get into that room I'm looking over the sales team, and it just, my instincts I felt were so honed that I could make that call in a very short period of time. And I was wrong. It's what I learned was that I didn't know everything there was to know about how to build a sales team. I had built a really, really good one. It took me 20 years to do it. I thought I knew it all, and I didn't. And I think what's changed about me is, and I'm still working on this, to be honest with you, is I grew up under a situation where we didn't get a lot of praise. We got a lot of what you could have done better. I remember my dad very specifically, one particular football game, I scored 3 touchdowns, but I also played defense, and all he wanted to talk about on the way home was how I missed a tackle. And in me, that drove something, right? I grew up under a situation where it was always could be better, could always do more. So I had to be careful in my early days, and I didn't do it very well. When I got in these rooms, I kept talking about what we could do better. I never took a moment to say, let's start with what went right. I always kind of went right down the path that we take that for granted, where we appreciate it, but it's taken for granted. Let's go right into how we could have done it better. We could have been better. And I think as I've evolved as a leader, and some of this has come from knowing people like Billy and also getting into some classes and learning more about being an effective leader, is I've had to catch myself and start with, well, let's take a moment first and talk about what went right. What did we do right? What could we, what can we celebrate? And then get into, okay, how could we have gone and done it better? Because the truth is, I'll never change that I want to be perfect, although that's a crazy goal to have, and you're never gonna reach it. I always can find ways to make it better, because my dad could, believe me, no matter how well I did, he could find a way to make it better, and never wanted me to be too comfortable with that I had it made, right? So I think for me, that's how I've evolved. And I think if you talk to my team in particular, even since we did our evaluations going into the PIN group, I think they would tell you they kind of wonder what happened to me, because I became this person that doesn't speak first all the time. I've also discovered you don't lay your opinion out there on the table, because a lot of people in the room it'll influence their opinion. They want to make sure they don't contradict you all the time, although a lot of my team is very confident contradicting me as many times as they want. But the truth is, I've learned a lot, and I've had to evolve. But I think one of the main places I had to evolve was I had to start with what went right. And girls taught me that, by the way. My girls growing up, as much as I was my dad in many ways, they could have given a care less. They wanted to play. They didn't care if they won. They didn't care. I think they've changed that as they got older, but they changed me, because I had to look at it and go, you know what? They just want to have fun. They just want to enjoy it. So I've had to retool myself in a way that is a core thing for me. And it is not easy. And I still battle it from time to time, because when something goes right, I'm turning the page to what can we do better, and I have to take a moment with my team, and we got to celebrate the wins. We got to celebrate. There's always something to find positive. Even in a bad situation, there's always something positive to find.
I love that, finding things to celebrate with, Chris. And I really do believe it. I mean, it speaks to the genuineness of who you are and who you are becoming. And that is celebrating those things going right, creating an environment for your team where they can come forward, particularly with disagreements. I'm like you. I have a team that has no problem disagreeing with me, telling me that that's the stupidest thing they've ever heard in their life. Matter of fact, I was 5 minutes before I walked in here. One of them was telling me just that. So I appreciate that. Appreciate those environments. And because, quite frankly, when we can sit in the room with our leaders and say, listen, I know you guys love me, and I know you can agree and disagree in the right spirit. And that's really what it's about, being able to disagree in the right spirit. So, Chris, we have 2 questions that we ask all of our guests, and just kind of winding up our interview today. Tell us about what you're reading. I know you're a learner. I know you're always reading, listening to something. So tell us what you're reading these days.
Yeah, I'll be lying to tell you I'm a reader, Billy, because I don't read. I'm a terrible reader. But what I do is I retain anything I hear. So I'm a big listener. I've got a 3-hour commute from my house to the Oklahoma corporate headquarters that I do a couple times a month, back and forth. And I'll listen to, that's where I pick up, a lot of my stuff. And what I listened to the other day, I was listening to the Be the Unicorn. It was kind of an interesting take on the habits that you can do to stand out. And people go, well, why are you reading about standing out? You're the CEO. I go, well, it's not about that for me. I like to read all types of things. I like to look back and go, did I have those habits when I was making my journey? And it's an interesting, I won't call it a read, but it's an interesting listen. And I have to admit, I listen to Simon Sinek a lot. I catch a lot of his stuff on social media about the why, why we're doing what we're doing. And I really like that. And I guess one of the things I was looking at the other day that I'm going to pick up next is a thing called coaching habits. It says say less and ask more. And that's kind of an interesting thing for me, coaching habits, because I do consider myself today a coach. As much as anything today, I'm a coach. I'm leading a team of really high producing winners. And all I've got to do is be there to support and give them the coaching when they need it and the support when they need it, and pick them up when they've skint their knee and help them attack the next one. So for me, that's me. I never was a reader, and that's why I was so good in school. Because if I go to the lecture, I had it. If they lectured it, I could take a test on it and pass it. So I'm a much better listener. I retain a lot more that way. If I go to reading, I'm a fall asleep. It's just not who I am. So that's my honesty, is you don't have to be a huge reader to be a leader, because these days you can pretty much listen to anything you want to find on leadership.
That's exactly right. And I mean, taking advantage of those rides, taking advantage of even the commutes back and forth to work. I came up listening, with the cassette tapes and the books on tape, taking advantage of those journeys, those 20-minute, 30-minute rides. And now, like you say, books, podcasts, all of those things are fantastic. So we're gonna link those. Be the Unicorn and Coaching Habits.
And this is where we shamelessly plug the podcast.
Yeah, and one of those things you can listen to, Chris, is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast when you're driving on your commute. So.
And I always do, by the way.
I appreciate that, Chris. So the last thing we ask all of our leaders, this is really one of the reasons we started this, so we could bring people like you here to speak directly to the emerging leaders. So if we had someone here in the meeting room with us today, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them to help them start their journey, their leadership journey today?
It's funny. I thought about this the other day. I thought about an old Ted Lasso thing. He said, when he's throwing darts, he says, be curious, not judgmental. And I think what always made me stand out was I was curious, and I was not afraid to ask questions. I never came out and said I wanted to be a leader, because honestly, that was kind of thrust on you and me as growing up, because if you were successful at what you were doing, you sort of got assumed you were a leader, right? And far from it. But I think today I would give advice to people that are looking to start their leadership journey. Be curious, and make sure people around you know that you're curious, that you have a desire to learn, you have a desire to potentially be a leader. Be vocal about it. Don't be ashamed about it. Be vocal about it. You may have people around you that think you're a little too outgoing, or you're a little too out there. But the truth of the matter is, be vocal about wanting to be a leader, and seek out people around you that you can learn from. Maybe seek out a mentor, but you don't necessarily have to be attached to somebody to see the good things you like in leaders. And you can see it on TV. You can see it in interviews. You can see it in people around you. There's people that do things a certain way and stand out. And really, to me, that would be my biggest part of advice, is get out there, meet as many people as you can. Don't be afraid. Don't squirrel yourself away in one spot. Get out there, be vocal. Be curious, and let people know, hey, I want to be a leader. I think about being a leader. I want to excel, and you don't have to be an A-type outgoing maniac like myself to be a leader, because a leader can come in many different ways. And some of the most important people in my life were quiet leaders. They were very unassuming, but just they led. You watched them and you said, man, I want to be like that, because they just carried themselves a certain way. They did certain things a certain way. What they said, you could believe in, and they backed up what they said. They did what they said they were going to do. And if you notice that, make a mental note, make a written note. Hey, I really enjoyed this part of that leader, and start working on those things in yourself and say, could I be that kind of leader? Could I bring that to my leadership journey?
Well, Chris, I know that those that are working with you at Gemini have a fantastic role model to follow. I appreciate your vulnerability being with us today, telling us about some of the things that you still have not mastered. I think that's important part of the story that you tell, and that's what makes you a great leader, your genuineness. So I appreciate you spending time with us on the podcast today. It's been our pleasure, truthfully, for you to be here today, and I appreciate your time.
Man, I appreciate it. Billy, I love you, brother. As always, I can tell you, you've been a real positive thing that's come in my life in the last couple of years. I've enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know what kind of leader you are. You inspire me as much as I'll ever inspire you. So I do appreciate you taking the time to interview me. And I hope that didn't bore your crowd too much. I've watched some of these, most all your podcasts, and to be honest with you, I had a lot to live up to. So hopefully you can polish this up a little bit. So, but I do appreciate it. Hali, good to see you.
All right, everyone, we're back just with a few closing comments. Hali, I was so looking forward to this with Chris. What a great interview. I love Chris's story. He has so much energy. I love the vulnerability he showed, particularly, he just says it. I'm not a reader. He pivoted right away, just said I'm not a reader. But he's a listener, and what greater quality could there be in a leader than being a great listener?
He's also a really good storyteller. You can tell that everything that he talked about, he lived it, and he's able to kind of communicate that well with the stories that he tells.
So what is your takeaways? What were your nuggets, your Chris Hicks nuggets?
I like that he talked about there's a little bit of sales in the CEO. And I think I'm seeing that a lot with our teams, is that we're all seeing that there's a little bit of everything in everybody. I have to be a little comfortable with being uncomfortable in some spaces and asking questions where everybody else in the room knows the answer and I don't. And I need the answer just to get a better understanding of the overarching goal. And I think that's great.
And two things for me. So I love that he said he would describe himself firm but fair. Oftentimes we can take one side of that ledger and it just doesn't come across as genuine, but firm and fair. But then the last thing he said is be curious, not judgmental. I think learning even from the beginning, we started this podcast, Johnny told us, stay curious, be the curious learner. And I think that served us well. So Hali, I look forward to our next podcast, but until then, tighten up.
Tighten up.
Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duray.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.